I want to jump up to 2 Samuel chapter number 9 tonight. David is sitting on the throne in Israel, and as he's sitting there pondering, it's got to be an experience for him because he's now sitting in the throne where somebody else used to sit. Who else used to sit in that throne? His name was? Saul. We spent a long time talking about Saul. And I'm positive that while he was sitting in that same throne room, he remembers the days where he was standing beside the throne playing music. Don't you remember where he started? And he remembers the days that David was playing and Saul was sitting and Saul was stewing while he was sitting, and Saul would have these random bursts of anger, throw something at David while he was in there playing. Now David's sitting in there in the throne room, and he starts to think about Saul. But there was somebody in Saul's family David loved dearly. His name was? All right, good. Jonathan, did you get that part? He loves Jonathan. All right, that's good. And David and Jonathan used to be best friends. Now, pop quiz, don't holler the answer out. Did y'all hear me? Do not holler the answer out. Danny, did you hear me? All right? Don't holler the answer out. Here we go. Listen. The last time David and Jonathan saw each other and had a best friend conversation. It's right before Jonathan went up to the top of the balcony, pulled out the bows and arrows and shot it, which meant, David, you got to get out of here. Before that happened, do y'all remember it? Yes or no? See, I already said don't answer out loud, and you already failed. All right, there it is. Okay, now listen. Before that happened, Jonathan looks at David. And I remember very clearly when we told the story, Jonathan puts his hands up on the shoulders of David, grips his arms firmly, and he says, I need you to make a promise to me. Does anybody in this room remember what the promise was? Anybody? If you remember the promise, hold your hand up. If you remember the promise, hold your hand up. See, now, guys, what's the good in telling the stories if you're going to forget them? All right, Pastor David, you said you remember what the promise was. What was it? Aha! Jonathan said, David, you're the guy that God's going to put on this throne one day. Do y'all remember that? Yes or no? And I know my dad's not been good to you. I know that you're having to now leave everything behind. Your wife, your kids, your house, because it's my father's fault. Now look at me, David. I need you to promise me that when God does what he's already told you he's going to do, you will be kind to my family. Do y'all remember that now? Yeah or no? Okay, good. Well, here's what happens. David's sitting on the throne. He starts just going through those memories of Saul and the family. And as David's going through the memories of Saul and his family, he looks around and there's nobody really that he recognizes that's left. Saul's family's been all but obliterated. They have been wiped off. They lost badly in the battle to the Philistines. Then the only relative he had left, the general tried to make him king last week, and we had the battle of the generals. Do y'all remember that? And in the end, two guys thought they were going to do David a favor, so they snuck in there, and they cut his head off. Y'all remember that story, yes or no? Yes. Some of you are like, yeah, I remember it. You weren't here last week. You did not remember that story. All right, I'm kidding. David can't find anybody to fulfill the promise to. So he looks in his palace. He says, is there anybody left in this palace that served King Saul? Now, I got to tell you something. I have been around Israel for a long time. I have worked in this palace for many years of my life. I know there's been some bad blood between Saul and David. And now the new king is calling for anybody who is loyal to the old king. Pause that for just a moment. Are you going to say, oh, it's me. I'm the guy. Are there any servants left of Saul? I ain't saying nothing. I'm not raising my hand. I don't know if this is a good thing. I don't know if this is a bad thing. I don't know if it's a test. So I'm just going to be quiet. What would you do? How many of you would be like, yeah, I remember the old king. Let me see your hand. Who wants to lie in church tonight? That's good. Okay, nobody. You wouldn't. You'd keep it to yourself. So here's what happens. He finds a man that was there a long time ago, and he says, hey, come here. Didn't you serve Saul? He says, yes, I did. What book are you in? Chapter number 9, 2 Samuel chapter number 9. And David says in verse number 1, is there anybody left of the house of Saul? Not so that I can judge them, not so I can take out revenge on them, not so I can punish them, but I want to show kindness. And the reason I want to show kindness is because that's a promise I made to Jonathan. There's got to be somebody left so I can fulfill my promise. And then he says, is there anybody here who served the house of Saul? And there's a man named Ziba. And David says, bring me Ziba. Ziba, did you serve Saul? I did, but now I'm thy servant. He speaks up and he says, I need to ask, Is there anybody left? Now, I wonder if Ziba debated in his mind. Should I say anything? Have you ever heard a king say, tell me, I won't be mad? Did you ever do that to your kids as a parent? Look at me in my eyeballs and tell the truth at church tonight. Have you ever looked at your kid and been like, hey, just go ahead and tell the truth. Just tell me the truth, and whatever it is, I promise you I'm not going to be mad. I promise I'm not going to blow up. I'm not going to be mad. And although your kids know exactly how you're going to react, they know exactly what you're going to say. Any of you ever looked at them and then your kid said whatever it was and you got mad? Does that ever happen to any of you, yes or no? All right, one honest person, everybody else is like, I guess maybe every now and then. No, you know you did. So Ziba's down there in front of the king, and maybe he's still on his knee, and the king says, is there anybody left in the house of Saul? To speak up or not to speak up? What's he going to do? And so Ziba speaks up, and he says something like this. Ziba's no fool. He's been around for a long time. He knows who David's best friend was. What was his name? We just said it a minute ago. And he starts off with this. Jonathan had a son. I could see David, who's been sitting back in the throne all day, sit up. He says, what's this? Well, there's a man down in Lodabar, and it's the son of Jonathan. You're kidding me. Jonathan has a son and he's alive? You mean in the house of Saul, one of the flesh and blood of my best friend Jonathan, he's here? Yes, he is alive. He's down in Lodabar right now. I know exactly in the household he's living in. I know exactly the kind of life he's living. And he said, listen. I want you to bring him to me. What's his name? I must know. I made a promise to my best friend, and he died by fighting the Philistines. And now there's never been anybody I could show kindness to after my promise. And what's his name? He said, well, his name is Mephibosheth. Say that with me. Mephibosheth. Do it again. Mephibosheth. I've been watching your tongues. Your mouth was not making those syllables. All right, what is Mephibosheth? Right there it is. Read it again. Now when Mephibosheth. You're like, why do I care about this guy? Can I tell you this is one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible? I love this story. And not just because of Mephibosheth. But can we fast forward kind of to the end? Let me just take a commercial break if I can for just a moment. And I want you to go to verse 12. And I want to start a new conversation. Mephibosheth had a young, what's your Bible say? Whose name was Micah. Mephibosheth had a son named Micah. Now, let's say Micah goes to school, and it's a show and tell day where you get to talk about, as Father's Day nears, the man your father is like. Micah's sitting in class with his head down. He's hoping that time will run out before the teacher calls his name. But sure enough, just because Micah must be a Moor somewhere else in his bloodline, the teacher calls his name anyway, and he comes down to the front of the class, and he's looking down at the floor like this, and the teacher says, well, Micah, tell us a little bit about your father. He says, well, he's not much. I don't mean that. It's not that he's not much. He can't do much. And Micah, this is supposed to be a day where you speak up about your father. Well, teacher, I know, I understand. You see, my dad's kind of a cripple. He's got a bum leg and a hip or something that since birth, he's never been able to do anything. We come from kind of a weird story where at one time we were royalty, and everybody in the class kind of snickers because Micah does not look like he's in royalty. He tries to tell everybody that his grandfather was the king, King Saul. Now the giggles turn into outright laughter. Your grandfather was the king? Okay, Micah, tell us another one. They know where Micah lives now. They've walked by several times, and they've looked at Micah as they've seen his father hobbling up into the door of his house. Micah says, it's true, he was, I tell you. My grandfather was King Saul. My dad's dad was Jonathan, the prince, the mighty guard who fought amazing battles. I'm sorry, Micah, this isn't tell about your family, it's tell us about your dad. My dad didn't do any of that. My dad never went to war. My dad never won a battle. As a matter of fact, if I have to tell you much about my dad, there's not much to say. I guess by the looks of things today, you would call him a bum. You might make fun of us because of our situation. We had to move out of our house, move away from our country, and there's nothing my dad can do to make it any better. But don't you worry, when I get big enough one day, I'll make my life better. When I get to make my own decisions, when I get to call the shots, I'll show you that I am of the bloodline of the king and that there are generals' blood flowing through my body. Thank you, Micah. You can quietly take your seat. I can see as Micah gets to the house that day and kind of kicks in the door. As he walks into his living room, I hear a feeble voice speak up, "Son, how was it today?" Whatever it was. Micah, come here a minute. What? What do you want, Father? Tell me about today. How did the assignment go? Did they call your name? Yes, they called my name. Well, what did you say about your old man? Dad, look at you. What could I say? I need you to hold on to this because this story, since a little boy, has been good to me. Not for David, not Saul, not for Ziba, not for Mephibosheth, but from Micah's perspective. The Bible tells me he's a young son, so he doesn't understand sacrifice and suffering. The Bible says he's a young man, so he hasn't quite understood the growth of what's required to make it in a world that really doesn't care about you except to step on top of you and get another leg up. Any of you ever been there, yes or no? We fast forward back to David, who's sitting on the throne in excitement. He's like, "We must find this Mephibosheth." And in the middle of Micah telling his dad there wasn't much to say, there's a knock on the door. It's very forceful. It doesn't sound pleasant, like there's a guest from the neighbor. "Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, are you here?" Micah freezes in his steps. "Who is that?" Again, the door knocks. "Mephibosheth, are you here?" There's some rummaging around inside the house as a crippled, deformed man drags himself across the living room to the door. "Who is it?" "The king's guard, King David, the king of Israel, he who sits on the throne." Could you imagine inside that house what the feelings must have been? Oh, dear God. We weren't there. We had nothing to do with what Saul wanted. We had nothing to do with Saul chasing David. We never even met him. We never wanted him dead. We had nothing to do with it at all. I remember my father talking about a man named David, but his name has been cursed all over this land. Our soldiers have spent months out chasing him on the hillside, and they come back angrier and angrier, some at the king, some at David, because they haven't been able to catch him. He's embarrassed the king over and over again. Now the king is dead. I have no protection. As the door unlocks and opens, there stands the cripple, laying on top of his staff. "I am Mephibosheth. The king has commanded us to take you to him immediately. This is it. I know this is over. I'll go with you. There's no need for violence." I wonder if the soldiers looked at each other a little puzzled. "May we take my son, or does he need to stay?" "No, I'll tell you what, Micah, I don't want you there. I want you to stay here at home." Micah looks at his father as the guards gather around him and escort him up the sidewalk to the road, to the carriage, to take him to the palace. Micah sits at the house. Now, I wonder if he was old enough to think any guilt about how he felt about his father, or the fact that that could be the last time he sees him, if David does what David is completely in the right to do, to finally be able to make sure there's no more threat to his crown. There's nobody else that's going to step up like the last son of Saul that ended up getting killed by his own guards and try to take the throne of David. There's not going to be a rebellion. There's not going to be a gathering of the troops that were loyal to Saul. I wonder if Micah sat over there and thought, "This is it. We've already been ran out of the kingdom. We've already been ran out of the palace. We've already been ran away from the land. Now there'll be nothing. There'll be nothing. I'll have nothing." I wonder if Mephibosheth said a word as they went back to a place he was very familiar with. And as they pulled up to the palace, and Mephibosheth walks among the guards all the way up the stairs slowly. He gets ready to lose his balance, and as his cane gets to slide underneath him and the soldiers reach for him, he's like, "It's okay, I got it." He pulls himself back up. He tries to straighten his decrepit body up to walk into the presence of the king. As the doors open, and there, all the way across that throne room, sits the mighty man of David, a man of valor, a man of battle, a man who killed Goliath, for crying out loud. The Bible said Mephibosheth didn't stick out his chest, didn't come with pride. Instead, he takes his way all the way down to the king, and there he falls down in front of him. And in one motion, as Mephibosheth hits the ground, the king shoots up off of the throne. I wonder if he could swallow. I wonder if he could breathe as his heart was pounding. The king steps down from his steps, and he comes straight to where Mephibosheth is, and he reaches down, and he gets him by the shoulders, and he stands him up in front of him. I wonder if he thought, oh my goodness, but then something changed. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no hostility in his voice when he says, you don't kneel here. No, sir. This isn't the place where you fall down. It is I who should be kneeling before you. It is I who should be honored to have you here with me. Mephibosheth, Your Highness, I'm sorry. I'm at a loss for words. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. He says, no, you don't understand. I knew your father. Your father was my best friend. Your father fought beside me in many battles. Your father protected me. Your father got me out of the palace when I was in dire straits. Your father was there for me, and he made me make a promise to him. Your father made me promise that if I ever sat where I sit, I would treat his family with kindness. I've never forgot the promise I made to your father. Mephibosheth, I had no idea you were alive until just a few days ago. I didn't even know you existed. And to hear you're the son of my best friend, Jonathan. Mephibosheth, I got to tell you something. I don't know what you came from. I don't know where you've been. I don't know what your life's like. But I promise you it's never going to be like that again. Check this out. Go back into 2 Samuel chapter number 9. 2 Samuel chapter number 9. Now when Mephibosheth, verse number 6. 2 Samuel 9, verse number 6. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, was come before David, he fell to his face to show reverence. And David said to Mephibosheth, and he answered, behold, thy servant. And David said unto him, fear not. I'm not here to punish you. I want to show you some kindness. I think what we'll start off with is asking this question. Do we have all the titles and the lands that used to belong to Saul and his kin? Can we find our hands on the records of the deeds to their property and to their household? Can we find their fields and their vineyards? Can we get our hands on those deeds? Yes, Your Highness, that shouldn't be a problem at all. But when Saul left the throne, when his son left the throne, all of those were stripped away from that family. And David said, give him back. Give him back everything we've ever taken from him. I want him to have his house back. I want him to have his land back. He says, Mephibosheth, I'm going to give you every single thing. All the land that was taken from you, it's yours again. What's going on? You ever heard something, good or bad, and all of a sudden, all you could hear was the ringing in your ears and the words kind of drifted off as the mouth was moving, but your mind couldn't process the news you were receiving? Has that ever happened to you? Yes or no? Most of the time it's bad. Most of the time you get caught with a knock at the door or a ring on the phone, and then everything just kind of goes numb for a minute. But occasionally in life, occasionally in a season of reward, in a season of tremendous blessing, the Lord opens up the window of heaven and does what he promises in his word he would do. He takes care of us. He makes our cup run over. And here we are shocked that God did what God said he was going to do. Mephibosheth standing in front of the king, and the king said, immediately, I want everything deeded back to him. Ring. He looks around the palace and says, is everything okay? Is the new king mad? Is this crazy? He said, I'm not done. You're not done, Your Highness, please. No, listen to me. Hey guys, when y'all set the table for the king, when it comes time for me to be able to sit down and eat every single night, I want a new chair sitting at my table. I want a new place sitting on top of the table. And Mephibosheth, from now on, you will sit at the king's table as one of my own. You're going to eat the same food I get to eat. You're going to get served the same way I get served. You will be at the table of the king. You know what? I'm sorry. I'm just so caught up in this moment. I want to do right by you, Mephibosheth. I forgot. I gave you vineyards and land. What are you going to be able to do with all that? Where's that? Ziba, come here. Ziba, first of all, I want to say thank you. Now, Ziba, you have a large family, don't you? Yes, my lord. How many sons you got? About 15. How many grandsons you got? 20 or so. I think I'm right in those numbers, somewhere about that. Let me look back here real quick to see. Verse number 10. Therefore, my sons and your servants. Ziba had, at the very bottom of verse number 10, it tells me, Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Pretty good dude, wouldn't you agree? Yes or no? He's not struggling. He said, Ziba, I got a new job for you. Yes, my lord, anything you desire. I want you to move out there with Mephibosheth. He's got a lot of vineyards and a lot of land to take care of. Yes, my lord, you're going to till it for him. You and your sons are going to work every day out there in the household of Mephibosheth. You're going to plant the crops, you're going to reap the harvest, and it's going to come in, and you're going to increase into his household. And Ziba said, as you wish, my lord, it'll be my desire. I was loyal to, King Saul, to Jonathan, the prince. I will be loyal to Mephibosheth. I and my sons and all of my servants will serve him. Mephibosheth can't breathe. He just got all of his land back. He's getting a chair at the king's table, and now they're going to take care of his property for him. The Bible goes on to say that David repeats everything he just gave to Mephibosheth. You're like, preacher, are you making it up or exaggerating the story at all? No, check it out. Verse 7, David said, I'm going to show you kindness for Jonathan, my father's sake. I'm going to restore unto you all of your land, all the land of Saul, your father, and you will eat bread at my table continually. Then he bowed himself and he said, oh, wait. Oh, wait. I thought he would be, if he could, jumping for joy. But that's not what happens. I thought his ears would be ringing from just the fact of this miraculous story. No. Look at the verse and don't skip it in the middle of the story. In the midst of being blessed with the greatest blessings of his entire life, Mephibosheth says, you've lost your mind, your highness. Who am I? I'm no better than a dead dog. Why are you being so kind to me? Your Highness, just earlier this very day, my son was telling me how disappointed he was. My son, Your Highness, he's got to hear this. And David said, I'm going to tell you something, Mephibosheth. Who you were before you met the king is not who you will ever be again. That is a lesson I keep telling this church every single time I get the opportunity. You cannot come in contact with a holy God, a King of kings, a Lord of lords, and be the same person you were before you met him. When Mephibosheth walks out of this throne room, his life is forever changed. It's all different. And now he's sitting there, he's saying, I don't deserve it. I'm broken. My body has never worked. There's been so many days I've been angry and frustrated. The men would go to war, but not Mephibosheth. The bum would stay at home. The men would come back in their victories, and Mephibosheth would be behind the back of the crowd. There were days they wouldn't even remember me in the family. My son is humiliated because look at me. David responds, Ziba's going to till your lands. He's going to bring in your fruit. But Mephibosheth, your new boss, he'll never eat with you. He's not going to eat at his house. He's not going to eat with you and your sons. He's not going to eat with his sons. He's not going to eat with anybody but at my table. Mephibosheth, the master's son, shall eat bread always at my table. Now, I always wondered why in an amazing story of David fulfilling his promise to Jonathan, why in the world God thought it was important to include Micah. Because can you imagine, as he's been sitting at home, waiting for news of his father's execution, as his family has begun to conspire or talk about and imagine what terrible things Mephibosheth must be paying for. As he's heard the gossip of the people nearby talking about it wasn't his fault, he couldn't do anything if he wanted to. And up comes the guard of the king. The same guard that took the father away is bringing him back to the house. And as the chariot opens, it is declared, you need to pack up all of your stuff. Why? What's going on? Did we lose it all? No, we're moving. Again? Yeah, we're moving. Where are we going? Back home. We're going back to our house. Dad, are you feeling okay? Son, you don't understand the kind of day I've had. And the king's guard steps forward and he says, young Micah, son of Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of King Saul, your father has been rewarded with a seat at the king's table. And Micah sits back to himself. Wait, my dad? My dad gets to sit with a king? My dad gets to eat supper with the king? I can't bet you the next day when he got running down to the school and he walked into the class, teacher, can I go again? Can I go again? I need to tell everybody about my dad. My dad is a cripple. He can't do very much, but my dad sits down at the table with a king, and he gets to eat every single day. I hear the class begin to laugh, and about that time, the classroom door opens up, and one of the king's guards steps into the room. Master Micah, it's time for us to go. Micah turns around and looks at the class. The class stands there with their eyes wide open and their mouth hanging down on top of their desk and their kneecaps as Micah is escorted out by an armed king's guard to get into the king's carriage to go back home to tell his dad bye just before his dad loads up in the same carriage to go back up to the palace and sit down with supper at a king. I'm telling you something. We hear these stories in the Bible. We're like, man, I wish that would happen to me. I wish somebody would knock on my door today and say I had a rich uncle and he left me everything. I wish somebody would tell me that there's been a mistake and we bought shares in Apple way before they ever invented a computer. I wish I knew Sam Walton, Walmart and Sam's Club way back in the day. You sit back and we think so small. We think that if maybe we knew the inventors of Microsoft, if maybe we knew the inventors of Tesla on a first-name basis, more so than if we knew them, if they knew who we are, our life would be so much better. If I only had a millionaire that was a relative or a billionaire that was a relative, if I had somebody that say, hey, I'll give you a little extra to put on your table every day, then my life would be better. And we walk around defeated and we walk around discouraged and we get in church on Sunday and we say, praise the God of the universe. Are you kidding me? You don't need a millionaire. You don't need a billionaire. You don't need a rich uncle or an inventor. You know God. More importantly, God knows you. And every day that you choose to, every day, you can get as much God as you want to. You can sit down at the king's table. Amen. Every day, you can be fed by the king as much as you can digest and handle. Every day, you can be shocked and amazed when he does exactly what his word says he's going to do. Open up the windows of heaven, pour out a blessing on your life, so much so that it'll run over your life into the lives of the people that are close to you. That's the God you claim to love. That's the God you claim to serve. Just like Micah, my dad used to be somebody. Well, my God always has been. My God always has been, and he takes me in his rags and his riches. Just like Mephibosheth, I'm a dead dog. And God says, no, you're not. You're one of my sons. You've been adopted, washed in the blood. Welcome to the family. You're mine. And I'm going to take care of you forever and ever and ever. What an amazing story of Mephibosheth. I wonder what it was like. That first day he got into the table, and he sat down, and people were all... And David cleared his throat. And Mephibosheth went to scoot his chair up. Stupid leg, stupid hip. He couldn't do it. One of the servants came up and said, Master, I have this for you. You don't have to worry about that anymore. And he pushes him up a little bit closer to the table. As the food begins to pass around, Mephibosheth's like, oh, no, just a little, please. Just a little. And David says, I don't think you understand it yet. You can eat everything on this table. You can take as much as you want off this table. If we run out, they'll make some more. Mephibosheth, this is yours. How many promises could you name that God's made to you tonight? Then why in the world are we walking around like, man, we must have got the wrong end of the stick? I watch the unrighteous prosper. I watch the unrighteous celebrate in their sin. Well, I feel like a martyr as a faithful follower of Jesus Christ. I'm telling you, our minds are all mixed up. Amen. You're behaving like a Micah. You're behaving like somebody who's complaining that you got a bad deal. I'm going to tell you something. I remember a little boy hearing the story the very first time. And when I heard it the first time, Micah was the character I latched onto. How embarrassed he must have been. And then when he put his head down on his pillow back in his room at his house, he had never been more proud of the fact that Mephibosheth was his daddy. Because Mephibosheth though he may not have looked like much or been able to do much, he had been blessed very much. We preach all the time about breaking generational curses in our family. You can keep blaming the outcome of your life right now on the decisions that are made before you, or you can turn to God who said, Lord, you promised to make all things new. Start with me. You promised to change. You promised to never leave your seed begging bread. You promised to never forsake me. You promised to never turn your back on me. Lord, you promised all things would be made new. I am a child of the King, and I'm asking you to start with me. If you get the story tonight, say, I got it. Never forget the story of Mephibosheth and his young son named. You got it. Would you bow your head and close your eyes? I wonder if there were ever future conversations between David and Mephibosheth, where in the middle of the conversation, David would stop and say, hey, Mephibosheth, you hungry? Let's go into the kitchen and see what they got cooking for supper tonight. I wonder if there was ever the opportunity where David said, hey, Mephibosheth, don't you ever walk in these palace doors again with that stomach rumbling. If you're hungry, just say so. I guess, church, I could ask you this question tonight. Maybe you're not hungry for food or for supper, but do you find yourself in need tonight? Do you find yourself saying, Lord, please, can you give me guidance? Please, can you give me direction? Please, can you provide? Please, can you heal? Please, can you make sick better? Please, can you deliver? Lord, please, financially, please. Is there anybody in the room? You find yourself tonight having to answer the question, how hungry are you? My advice to you tonight is right there with your eyes closed. Pull yourself up to the table and have a conversation with the King. Watch what God has done and is doing, how he is changing and making all things new. Don't you dare forget the battles he's won. Don't forget the prayers he's answered. Sometimes in the darkest season of life, we want to turn our attention to God and ask him why he's allowing this to happen to us, instead of throwing our hands up towards heaven saying, God, please help me like you've never helped me before. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're going through. But I beg you, as a child of the King of Kings, have a conversation with the King tonight. Dear Lord, I come before you to say thank you for all that you've done. And I will go ahead and praise you for all that you will do. There are hurting hearts in this room tonight. There are hurting minds in this room tonight. There are people carrying heavy burdens, and their smile makes everybody think they've got their life together. There are people who have been striving and fighting to try to get ahead. And Lord, it's like no matter what they leave behind, no matter what sin they walk away from, this life gets harder. Lord, you promised over and over again and again the blessings of a heavenly Father to his children. I pray that in return of the promises, Lord, you will get absolute surrender, total commitment. That, Lord, we will open up our lives to you. We will become willing vessels for you to fill us and use us. Lord, I pray that our children's children will be able to talk about how blessed we have been to love, know, and serve the King. I love you. I do, and I thank you for being an amazing God to me. In Jesus' precious name I pray. And all God's people said, amen.